Currently we've got 65 million people displaced around the world, so the refugee issue is a global one. What does that mean for the way we respond to it as a global community?
I think first of all it requires that there is much more of a political commitment globally to really addressing the underlying issues, but also to look for solutions. But I believe one of the key issues at the moment is the enormous increase in refugees in so many different situations and the lack of a potential for refugees to look at returning to their home countries. Well, we have received enormous support financially for many of these situations over the years. In between, the gap between the needs and the requirements, I think, has grown to a level where more financial support and a different financing approach is needed to make sure that not only the refugee operations and the refugees themselves, but also the host countries are appropriately supported. But clearly, together with a political endeavor to bring to a halt the persecution and the conflict situations and to make it possible for refugees again to do what they want to do, that is to go home voluntarily, in safety and with dignity.
What are the things that people most misunderstand about refugees, asylum seekers and the whole issue in public debates and conversations?
Refugees are perceived by some as a burden and as a problem. And I think that is the fundamental misperception. Refugees are actually the central contributors, not only to their own situation, but to so many aspects of situations of conflicts. They are really the solution in themselves, and if in many instances refugees were given a bit more of an opportunity to show that contribution they can make both to their own family, to their own society, to their host community, but also with regard to the resolution of a conflict in their own home country and the reconstruction upon return, I think we would see so many better results, so many sustainable results, and this is, I believe, one of the elements that need to be put out very square in front.
So is there a case to be made that refugees can be an economic asset rather than a liability?
I believe clearly they are, and this is becoming more and more evident. We have recently concluded memoranda of understanding where this understanding that refugees are a contribution, that they can make an enormous contribution, not only culturally, not only in so many senses of maintaining and giving meaning to a lot of values and principles, but also economically, where all of that has come to the fore and where I think now there is a very clear sea change and a very different interest to support these opportunities.
So in the light of that, how can Australia play a positive role in refugee protection in this region and beyond?
Well, Australia has already for many, many decades played a very exemplary role when it comes in particular to third country resettlement and the settlement and integration of refugees. I think to play more of a sample role and to help a better understanding of the good experiences there would certainly be one element, but also I think a reflection on some of the changes with regard to the asylum system that have been introduced over the past years and that unfortunately have not led to a very positive impact, but rather have caused a considerable challenge both for refugees but also the authorities and the officials who have to deal with refugee status determination, a reflection back to the very good established principles and procedures that have been in existence in Australia for a considerable period of time, and to bring out these procedures and systems as an example for other countries would certainly be a very valuable contribution.
Apart from the refugee crisis, we're seeing unprecedented levels of migration. Global warming might even see these numbers increase. Are there adequate mechanisms in place globally for, these patterns of migration to be managed in an orderly way?
That is an area that certainly requires a lot of attention. I think global mobility has just shifted both in terms of quality and in quantity just over the last 10 or 20 years in an unprecedented manner. The recognition of those developments, I think, is far behind the realities, and certainly the mechanisms to manage in a predictable manner and to facilitate some of these movements are not there. This is where, in addition to refugee protection and the systems and structures that have been established there for decades already, it is now important to also look at migrants. While migrants are very different from refugees in so many respects, they are still human beings, and they are still human beings that need protection, that need predictability, as much as states and governments need predictability and tools that are available and suitable to deal with human mobility in the sense of migration. And that's where I hope that in September this year, at the Global Compact in New York at the UN General Assembly, there will not only be a good opportunity to look at the important issue of refugee protection, but to also look at the related issue of migration and what can be done to bring further advances to that topic.
So finally, Thomas, you've had a long career in the humanitarian sector, and we've just talked about the unprecedented challenges that we're seeing at the moment. What is it that motivates you to do the work that you do?
I think when I look at my colleagues, both within UNHCR, but also with partners in government, in non-governmental organizations, and just in civil society, if we all help together, and I think I have seen that now in my good 30 years of refugee protection work all over the world, we can do the impossible. I don't think many other opportunities in life bring so much of satisfaction that we have spent our life, that we have spent our efforts in the right way. And I think here the partnership of everybody is absolute key. Nobody can do this alone, and when it's done jointly, I think it brings the appropriate results, and I think this is where colleagues at AMES Australia and so many others around the world bring joy and pleasure, not only to refugees when they finally have an opportunity to restart life again, but that's also something that I find very enjoyable and very satisfying.
Thomas Albrecht, thank you so much for talking to us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.